we've got the privilege to have Seema Dhanak here again. She's got 16 years of experience of working in local authority as a homeless caseworker. She specialises in complex cases with domestic abuse, safeguarding, modern slavery, mental health, and prison release. It's great to have her here again. And also, we're really lucky today to have Shah. He's an MP for Bradford West. She's a shadow minister for community cohesion. There's a lot to say about Naz, but I was going to focus on a few things. And so one of the things I read about her, that when she was 20, her mother was convicted for the murder of her partner, who had been sexually and physically abusing her for over a decade. And Naz worked tirelessly to get her mum out of prison, and she was working with Southall Black Sisters. So she's got a huge amount of experience and knowledge to talk about some of the subjects that we talk about. So thank you, both of you. I really appreciate you coming today. So one of the first questions that I wanted to kind of ask today, and if we could start with Naz possibly, is please explain what you think about when we talk about abandoned brides. And please, can you give some examples of different scenarios of this?
Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your web cafe today. It's an absolute honour to be with you. Lovely to be surrounded by ladies who are working towards the same goal, which is making the world a better place. Abandoned brides. So I had a forced marriage at 15, and I've been working on the issue of forced marriages and honour-based crime for a very, very long time. But what has come up recently is this, particularly with the South Asian community, predominantly in the South Asian community, is that the men go back to Pakistan, they marry a woman, they either abandon her in Pakistan or they bring her into the UK. When she's maybe even had a child, take that child off her, send her back to Pakistan, and she doesn't have so they might get her indefinite leave to remain. They might not get her indefinite leave to remain. They might not, the family might have just been, because the relationship, because often what happens is the guy has got a relationship ongoing here, but to keep the parents happy, he'll go along with this idea. So they'll be like, right, we've got a child out of it now, so we'll keep the child and you can kind of do what you want. Or they expect the guy to fix up, and the guy doesn't fix up. So then it becomes, well, we've got this girl here now, what do we do? So we'll send her back to Pakistan. I've had a few cases in my constituency, quite a few cases actually. So I had one girl who was abandoned in Karachi, and she was, so we managed to get her back to the UK because there was a member, her relative, who sponsored her and got her back, and her children were taken off her. There was another girl who was tricked into going on her anniversary holiday to Turkey. From Turkey, she was put on a flight to Pakistan, and she was abandoned in Pakistan. And often when the Pakistani families, and I relate, a lot of my cases are in Pakistan, and what happens is you've got a girl who's gone back, and the way they pigeon it, the way they package it all up, is that this girl was dishonorable, she wasn't good, she was having an affair, she was cheating, she was doing something. So they have to justify why they've kind of like abandoned her. And often it's that slur of, the kind of language they use around it. So I had the case where a young girl who'd come from Pakistan, and I met her, and she came from Pakistan, got married. And when she came here, it was literally like, it was like she was kept like a slave. And then when she picked up the courage to leave, the family wouldn't dare do anything to support her. So one family, often it's close families, one family was supporting her. They weren't able to go to the police, despite all the encouragement in the world that I would support them. They were not going to go to the police. But because of the abuse that she'd suffered, she had a family who were willing to take her in and give her that support so she could get her indefinite leave on the grounds of domestic violence. These women don't have recourse to public funds. They don't often have had said that they had domestic violence. They're not able to articulate that, or they don't know how to access that support because they're isolated. But the whole kind of conversations all of us will know around domestic violence, about that power, coercion and control. And a lot of girls will put up with it because, and one girl in particular, this one that stayed here and wouldn't get police help, because her mother-in-law and people could have been charged with modern slavery under modern slavery law, under lots of different laws could have been applied. And the police, I've got a really good relationship with the police, but she wouldn't, because she said, well, if she went home, her father might as well kill himself, because it would be that she's been taken back to Pakistan and she's been dishonored. So that whole concept of honor violence and control comes into the conversation. So it's really, really hard. We've got the other side, which is a man will go to Pakistan and never bring the girl over here. So he'll marry her, he'll have a child, the child will be a British national, he'll say he's applied for the visa for the woman, bring the child over and abandon the woman over there. So there are so many cases that we've had in Bradford West. And I know that Southall Black Sisters were working with the government to try and get this into the domestic abuse bill, but it's not quite got there, which is a real shame. I think generally migrant women have been really failed, women who have by the domestic abuse bill. It's not got, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to get things right. And the government has really, really failed on that, as much as I welcome a lot of stuff that has come about. So women are, it's really, really sad when you meet these women, because the ones that I've met and the ones that I've spoken to, so guys going over there, they were already married in this country, they've got no intention of bringing them girls over here, and then for them families over there, they're often very poor, and they're seeing that they're going to give their daughter away, and she's going to have, at least she will be made, her children will have a better life, she will have a life, and that one mouth to feed in poor families in Pakistan. So there's places, and abandoned brides in the UK, but there's also cases that are in Pakistan. So in my village, where my family come from, we had a case where, and this is, it goes beyond, it crosses borders, there's this stuff. This girl was married, she had a child, they took the child off her, sent her back to her parents. That one extra mouth to feed was put them into a real difficult position. And I had to exercise some of my networks in Pakistan to get them to pay for her. So the idea, so that was really, that was their responsibility, but they wouldn't. And she was, lots of times there was a girl recently who came to Bradford from Sheffield, and her baby was taken off her. She wasn't even allowed to hold her newborn child. Literally, she was, the father was there. She was, the coercive control they had over that girl was absolutely horrible. She wasn't able to get because I was really struggling with this one, because she wasn't able to get the support from the hospital. She wasn't able to stay because she was so fearful that she would lose a child. And in the end, she did lose a child, and now she's having to go through court, and she's ended up in Bradford. So the issue is it's not as unheard of as people think. It's rare. It's not rare. It genuinely isn't rare. And then you've got the young guys who are bringing the girls over, who are in relationships here, and to them it's a forced marriage. So there's the victim is one is the girl potentially, but there's also the victims who are guys who have been pressured into going over. Some of them are absolute, they're very, very aware of what they're doing, and they're doing it to go along. But there has to be a real culture shift in the thinking of the community, as well as empowering of young people. And some of that is about talking about what good marriages look like, because you can get people in a room, and you can talk about forced marriage to just girls who are more likely, from a South Asian heritage, etc., statistically more likely to have an issue. Or you can empower people around them to give them the support by talking about what a good marriage looks like. So by that approach, what we're doing is we're allowing other people and peers to support that young person. And that's not happening enough either. But there are lots and lots of cases. There's a Turkey case, there was the Sheffield case, there was the Karachi case, and these are the BD5 case. There's about 5 cases that I've dealt with just in 1 year alone. And now people are getting to know about it. People are talking more about it. So it's because, 6 cases in last year. So yeah, lots of examples.
It's very complex.
Yeah,
it's very complex. Seema, would you like to add anything, please?
Yes, so thank you for having me on the platform again. It's always a pleasure to speak on the Oxford Against Cutting platform. I really want to sort of resonate with the things that Naz has said, actually. As a professional, I have to agree that in my line of work, where I'm persistently dealing with what is normally sort of homelessness as a result of domestic abuse or modern slavery, etc., the cases of the abandoned brides doesn't really fall under a specific remit. And that for me is worrying, because when we think about the profile, yes, fair enough, an abandoned bride could be from anywhere, you know, and however, the issue does seem to be more prominent in the Southeast Asian community, and the profile that Naz sort of very well articulated about, you know, being women of no recourse to public funds. They're from places like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and they're being brought over by sort of UK nationals. In some cases, they're given recourse to public funds. In other cases, they're not. But it doesn't alter the fact that these women are often mistreated, borderline domestic abuse. Sometimes there is domestic abuse, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes there's modern slavery, sometimes there isn't. So when you have an abandoned bride coming to a service like the local authority, like the council, we're looking at, okay, so what's the reason for homelessness? And if they're telling us, well, the relationship has abandoned, what do we as a professional then look at that? From which perspective do we look at that? And the concept of an abandoned bride, I don't think has been fully explored by Western world professionals. I think this is the problem, I'm sure Naz will agree with me, that she's had with professional services, even as far as Bradford, is that what category, what compartment do you put them in? And it's sad that we have to describe it that way. But unfortunately, when we're recording cases as a professional, that what is the nature of this case? What is the reason for this person's homelessness? Under what duties do we have any authority or autonomy to even sort of work with someone like that? The difficulty is that you've got, like Naz said, women who have no recourse to public funds. They might slip through the net of domestic abuse because the abuse isn't being recognised, because it's perhaps only emotional and psychological and financial. The fact that they are being made to serve the whole entire family and not have any independence isn't necessarily being recognised as domestic servitude, which would then come under modern slavery. So it's, as well as training the community, which I'm a huge advocate for myself, the other place that needs to be trained when it comes to abandoned brides is professionals like myself. It's local authorities, it's social workers, it's independent domestic violence workers who are fantastically trained when it comes to domestic abuse. But when it comes to these cases that are borderline, you know, abandoned brides doesn't have an official title, the same way that forced marriage, FGM, domestic abuse and everything else, human trafficking, you know, they're all categorized under a legislation, but abandoned brides isn't. And that is where I have a problem with that. I have a problem with that because it makes it harder for powers within local authorities to find ways of helping them. I have a problem with that because it means that no one will pick up that baby because they don't know what to do with it. You know, and you know, we're fortunate to have people like Naz who have kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but almost felt your way through the process, and it has been a case of, let's try and just test and try out what we can do to get this person a positive outcome. It shouldn't have to be that way. There needs to be task force meetings happening. There needs to be professionals coming together from a safeguarding perspective to say, right, okay, fine, we don't have a definitive legislation for abandoned brides, but that doesn't mean it's not a safeguarding concern. You know, if you have cases like what Naz has described, and I've seen similar ones, where, you know, the abuse was only emotional and psychological, but I say only, that's professional kind of professional talk coming out there. But only, how much psychological damage has that emotional abuse done to that abandoned bride? How much damage has it done financially to this woman in terms of, you know, the amount of money that the family have perhaps spent on the wedding and getting her there, and how much of her own aspirations and her dreams have been shattered because she's been abandoned? The cost of the mental health is not being considered. the financial cost is fair enough, it's measurable, but the cost of that person's mental health, the cost of that on professional services, and the cost of that on sort of, you know, as a whole, services being provided in terms of housing or immigration, is just not being addressed anywhere. So I would agree that for me, the typical profile of an abandoned bride fits exactly what Naz is. We are very much on the same page there. And for me, I would take it a step further to say that, yes, I recognise what an abandoned bride is. However, I also want to see that recognised within more professional services as well.
I think if I can just add to that, the biggest block that I get, which is, well, and this is where the professionals put these women, well, marriages break up. They don't recognise it as being abandoned. They don't recognise it as being orchestrated. They don't recognise it in the lens of abuse. They say, yeah, but she's come over, the marriage didn't work.
Breakdown.
Yeah, the marriage didn't work, so why is she abandoned bride? Well, actually, no, you've got to look at what the background is. Did they have mitigating circumstances which knew that this marriage wasn't going to work? Was it initially a forced marriage? Was it a coerced marriage? If it was there a vulnerability and the power? And was it, you know, that power and vulnerability juxtaposed created a situation where there was abuse, there was potential abuse? Because the vast majority of marriage that do come from South, you know, there are transatlantic marriages that absolutely work. We've seen lots of them, but nobody, the authorities, and certainly I'm not holding my breath for this government to get that on domestic violence and that kind of abuse, because it takes a real step change for us to take a leap of faith, a leap of something to understand that this is in itself orchestrated abuse. Yes. Because let's face it, if you're going, because that's what happens in the majority of these cases, there's something underlying which says this marriage should not happen in the first instance. There is a trigger there which is saying, well, actually, are we just trying this? Are we as parents saying to our kids, oh no, you're going to fix up, once you get married you'll be absolutely fine? How many times do we hear that in the community? It's all right, once we get married we'll be fine. And then it's like, no, it's okay, once we've had a baby it'll be fine. It's like as if a baby or a marriage is going to fix a person, rather than dealing with the issues of that person and what their experiences are at the time. And that's what's really, really worrying, is that narrative isn't cutting through to local authorities. And let's be honest, you know, I've lost 55 bed spaces in Bradford when austerity cut in my constituency for domestic violence. And you've got the issue of no recourse to public funds. And then you've got the cuts, the everything else, and police to try and, how long has it taken us as women of black and minority ethnic backgrounds to get forces to look at the issue of honour abuse? You know, it's out of 43 forces. I was on the Home Affairs Select Committee when we were looking at this. Around, I think less than 5% of them had a grip on what honour violence was, and what, you know, even if we look at the mainstream, the idea of coercion, we've got that into law now, but how many years has it taken us? And my worry is, and what I hate about processes and the way things work, is that it takes so long to change that narrative, you know, of what is abuse, and actually this is orchestrated abuse. So do we need to, as women, and this is out to you guys, do we as women need to develop a narrative that this is actually orchestrated abuse, and find some case samples and then put them out there? Apart from SPS, I don't know, so South for Black Sisters and Muslim Women's Network, I don't know who does lead that work. I know there's a task force around domestic violence and this work has been discussed there, but actually, are we going to make some real inroads? And you know, I mean, it's given me a lot of food for thought as well, because I've had so many cases, and I did say last year, but COVID happened, that I would do a targeted campaign on abandoned brides, and then COVID happened. But yeah, it might be something that I can revisit once we've come back, probably after summer now, won't be before. But yeah.
Thank you. It's an interesting point where you say about abandoned brides, that actually it's just a marriage that's failed. Now, is that the case that authorities, government don't want to get too political, but actually it's easier to go down that route because to face it would actually you'd have to put resource in there for a start. So that's just something
Absolutely.
I just mentioned. You've also touched on harms. So what harm is caused when a bride is abandoned in the UK or abroad? And you both touch on it, but I'd like to explore that a bit more, please. Maybe Seema?
So I think the vast majority of the cases that I've seen, there is it tends to be the psychological damage, and also the psychological damage is then kind of reinforced and picked at over and over again when you've got individuals who don't understand how bad it is for that individual. People who don't understand the concept of, I can't go back to my parents. There is an honour thing there. My parents are poor. They live in a village. They will commit suicide out of shame. The emotional blackmail that goes on in the background when it comes to these sort of cases where it's an abandoned bride, when, for example, the things that Naz was saying was, the trauma of being called, that you're not good enough, that you were, your character was wrong, you were cheating on them or whatever it was. And even whether that's true or not, I'm not here to judge that. But what I will say is that when you go through that level of trauma, the after effects will last for years. And as someone who is studying psychotherapy at the moment, those traumas will continue to live with you, breed with you, and they manifest in unhelpful behaviors. I've seen it manifest into addictions. I've seen it manifest into unhelpful behaviors such as OCD, self-harm, alcoholism, drug use, and that is all within the Asian community. Alcoholism and drug use is something that isn't generally associated with Asian women suffering domestic abuse or any form of abuse. However, if we look at, this is a case that I'm hoping will jump out to some of you in the room, the Kiranjit Ahluwalia case, she did turn to alcohol to self-medicate. And I also want to look at suicide rates within the Asian community. Now, I would put abandoned brides as under the umbrella of domestic abuse. Personally, when I look at what it actually is, I would put it under domestic abuse. And when we look at, there are some statistics, and I must see if I can find the study on this, but there was a study that was done in 2015. So it was quite a long time ago. And it was looking at Asian women who suffered domestic abuse. Now, the study actually specifically said that they are 40% more likely to commit suicide. And that is proportionately higher than any other community around the world. So that for me is really it illustrates how bad the problem is. We also need to look at, self-harm isn't just about cuts and harming yourself, it's also neglect, which is another byproduct of the damage that is caused by abandoned brides, by the whole issue of abandoned brides. If you were to put yourself in that person's shoes for a moment and live their life for a day, I think you would truly understand how bad it must be for them. And that is where another sort of difficulty that comes in is that because we are not hearing about these cases enough, and not enough noise is being made to bring abandoned brides under the umbrella of domestic abuse, the same way that honour-based violence has, that because they are not being taken so seriously, because they are not being believed and they're not getting the help that they need, that in itself could be causing all sorts of issues of mental health, depression, anxiety, and everything else that we've just spoken about, the self-harm, addictive behaviours, unhelpful behaviours. We also need to think about what is it doing to damage our communities? What message are we putting out there? That if we are willing to just accept that abandoned brides is just a relationship breakdown, then what message are we putting out to our children? What message are we putting out to our communities? That we actually condone relationship breakdowns, where if you were to forensically look at the way that these marriages have been played out, like Naz says, if there was something in the equation that was always going to be a mitigating factor to that relationship not working. Whether it's the fact that the marriage was forced, whether it was through coercion, whether it was through emotional blackmail, whether it was through any other means, whether the partner here has actually got a sort of an ongoing partner here, that relationship is also being damaged. And then you've got relationships, being damaged along the way, parents, siblings, wider communities, extended families, especially when within the Asian community, so many marriages happen within families and close-knit communities. Those entire networks of relationships are being damaged too. They're being damaged, but they also tend to be swept under the carpet in terms of the damage. Some families will call it politics, some families will call it drama, but they're not actually accepting the problem for what it really is. And if someone's life gets lost in this because they can't take it anymore, they end up committing suicide, where is the accountability for that? And for me, that is where I say, okay, let's not just look at harm against the victim. Let's look at harm against the entire wider community in terms of the messages we're putting out to the wider community, our children and generations to come.
Yeah, thank you, Seema. I think you've made a really good point, particularly on not just looking on the individual, but looking on the wider community. Because until we look at the wider community, we can't solve these issues.
I agree.
Naz, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with everything that Seema has said. And I also think, from whether children involved, whether we have the same lens applied for safeguarding is also a concern. Because I know as a child whose mother was abused and the impact it had on me. I mean, that was an extreme case in that she went to prison. And I remember the Kiranjit case at the time, because my mum was in prison at that time. So I remember that well, and SBS were working on that. But I do think there isn't enough awareness in the community, and not enough people are talking about it. So with me, the girl from Turkey, for example, was the girl that was taken to Turkey. Her family were very, very, the family that she was taken her, and she was a first cousin, were a very prominent family in the community. Now, to me, that was absolutely, it was a bit like the Samia Shahid murder, which is, a huge family in the community who's going to take it on. Nobody would dare take it on. And that's the kind of case that I would take on. But it was, well, we don't want to go public on it. So I had to work, I had to literally, in a way, tell the family, you either sort this out through the family that was supporting the girl, either we get her back, otherwise I will go public on this. And it was that kind of shaming them publicly and holding them to account publicly was the only way that they took that responsibility. And even that responsibility, I mean, the damage was done. Even that responsibility means getting her back into the country, allowing her to live her life and supporting her to be the right, to live her full potential is a huge, huge shift. But that came from the community perspective. So communities can do that and families can do that. But let's face it, how many girls will actually get to a position where they contact an MP like me? How many girls will even get to the position where they tell their doctor, or where they tell, and when it's too late, when the horse is bolted, when they're in Pakistan, then they have to, the other thing is they have to fight from Pakistan. And who's going to fight the system? Because you can't, once you've left the country, you can't come back and fight it on the turf here. You've got to fight. And we've had that case, the Karachi case, but there's not many who will then put their energy and efforts in. And it does concern me, Seema, the idea of, 40, I didn't know about the research of 40%. So if you send me that'd be really helpful for certainly for myself. But, we know that when women are driven to suicide, and I know about SBS again have been campaigning on getting the law changed. So there is a homicide, culpable homicide, if you like. So if you're driving a woman to literally commit suicide, if you're driving her that she hasn't got a choice, she knows she's going to go back to Pakistan, she knows she's got no life there, and even if she wasn't neglecting herself, even if she wasn't turning to drink, drugs, alcohol, the option for her, who's going to marry her once we've known that she's come back, and all of this, what is the culture for her in Pakistan? So then the option of, well, I either stay at home, my father has shame, my brothers have shame, my sisters have shame, nobody's going to marry my sisters now because I've brought shame on the family. So what's the point? There is all of these things, and I just don't think we understand. And I think we get it. I certainly get it. But how do we change the culture of society to get it? And that's going to be a long, hard piece of work. But I'm happy to start that, and I know that others are working on that. But there's huge implications, because it is, we are the role models. So this is personal to me. When I left my husband, and I was pregnant at the time, so I'm a single parent to 3 amazing young people. And don't get me wrong, me and my ex are best friends, and we have really, really good, the kids are here with me in London. But at the time, I remember thinking, I'm 7 months pregnant, I'm walking out of a marriage, but I need to be and I knew I was having my second boy, because I've got a daughter and 2 boys. And I remember thinking, I need to be the role model for my kids, because if my kids see that relationship and we weren't being the best that we could be to each other, then my daughter's going to think, well, that's her idea of marriage, that would be okay for her husband, and my sons will think that's okay for them, because that's what we're raising. And if that's okay, and it comes back to that point that Seema made, well, actually, what are we sending out as a message to the community? Well, some lad's come back, he satisfied his parents, he got married from the girl in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever, and look, he's carrying on living his life. So do you know what? I'll do the same. Because at least in the end, yeah, it takes me a couple of years, but at least they can't say I didn't do it for them. At least they can't say I didn't try and I didn't get their niece over. And then if their niece hasn't got the husband, because the other side to it is other people do pick it up and think, well, where is he? He's not at home. So if he's not at home, the pressure on the parents to kind of, there's so many different angles to it. It really is, it's complicated, but it's not. It's that kind of, it's complicated in trying to explain it to people, and there are situations, but actually it's not. It's really simple. It is, as far as I'm concerned, it is orchestrated abuse. And because if there is a factor to begin with that suggests that this isn't going to be, what are the ingredients of getting married? My nephew's getting married tomorrow, and he's getting married tomorrow. They met, they fell in love with. We had an exchange with the families, and now there's the wedding happening because they want to be together. Because they've. It's not because he doesn't want. He's being coerced into it because he has to do it. It's not because she does. They're from 2 different cultures, but isn't that the ingredient? Isn't that there has to be a prerequisite for marriage in the first place, doesn't it? And that prerequisite in these cases, 9 out of 10, is not met. 99% of times is not met. That 1% might be where the marriage is genuinely broken up and they're not taking responsibility, and they're just genuinely thinking, well, the marriage isn't working out, and we've tried, but we're not going to take responsibility. Even that is still an issue, where you're not going to take responsibility because you've taken somebody out of their home and the cultural context of within which you've taken that person. You do bear responsibility. And there is a long way to go. There is a long way to go, but yeah, I do hope that it will change.
Thank you. It's a lot to take in there, but some of the points we talked about, I think, which ran through all the conversations, was shame. So shame is a big thing, and on our web cafes we've talked about shame a lot through many topics. So for me, that was a really important point. And public funds, which is a real shame that the current bill hasn't addressed, because that would have made a difference. So there were many points you've made, and I really appreciate it. These are heavy and difficult conversations, but we need to have them. And something you mentioned also was these issues seem difficult, but actually they can become simple. And it's a mindset, particularly for parents, to change the mindset. And as a parent myself, it's my responsibility to change my mindset for my children, because I wouldn't want them to be in any of those positions. So really, it's for us, particularly as mothers, I would say, is to change the way we think, and obviously fathers as well. and it is possible, and it will change, because it has to change. So thank you very much for both of you for coming and speaking today. If we can just turn the recording off, Dot, and then we'll go.
Ba-da-bum-bum-bum.